All right, we're good. Good. All right, so welcome everybody back from the break on YouTube and here on Zoom as well. We've had a very interesting first part of this workshop. I think we've touched on many different topics, but all of them sort of relating to the meaning of the word excellence in research and that how it relates to also diversity and inclusion and all that, how it also ties into funding, which is our sort of main topic of the day. It's a great honor to now welcome our next speaker, Professor Thomas Zurbuchen. Thomas is NASA's Associate Administrator of Science, and in that role also responsible for NASA's science program, including Earth science, heliophysics, planetary science, and astrophysics. I'm going to keep the introduction short in that respect, but especially also with Thomas, it could be a much more longer introduction. The title of his talk is NASA Science and the Future of Astronomy. And with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Thomas. You've got about half an hour, and I'll give you a heads up when you've got like 10 and 5 minutes left to go. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us.
I really appreciate it. And thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to speak here. What I'm going to do is give you a context of my statements first by just giving you kind of the top-down view of our program of astrophysics as part of it with the decadal survey just coming up, how we're looking at it, but then really focus on the very important topics that were just discussed in the other talks as well. How can we, from the government perspective, affect and kind of, diversity and inclusion in our field and excellence as part of that. I'm going to, of course, talk about what we mean with excellence. And I'm going to tell you already now that I'm going to focus a lot on excellent teams, being diverse teams that are in which many voices are included into the discussion in a direct fashion. And with that, what I'd like to kick it off at the next slide that talks to you about, our kind of overall strategic framework. We, of course, discover the secrets of the universe in all parts of our program. Search for life elsewhere, this such an important and critical topic in astrophysics, but also in planetary science and other disciplines, and protect and improve life on Earth and in space, whether it's with our observations here and elsewhere. What I really want to point to is the values that we're putting in front of us. Everything we're doing is driven by these values. And I already talked about teamwork. I talked about, excellence. Generally speaking, that's what we focus on. But what's really critical to us are two values that I want to focus on, which is safety and inclusion. I just want to tell you, of course, safety means different things. For example, if you or on an airplane, we want to make sure that everybody walks off that airplane safely and uninjured. Same with rockets if we shoot them into space. But it also means psychological safety wherever we are. I think it's absolutely critical that people have the opportunity to say what is on their mind. And then frankly, it's absolutely critical to build excellence, to create such an environment. Inclusion, as you see, is one of the values, not only at our level, but also at the level of NASA, where it was put in place a couple of years ago. So my hope is, as you go through it, you see these values kind of shining through that are really part of it. So the next slide just gives you a sense of what we're doing here, kind of where astrophysics is in it, and of course the overall work. You see astrophysics and James Webb Space Telescope are two lines. That's because the Congress told us we should focus on James Webb Space Telescope. And it's, I just couldn't be more excited to have this amazing telescope unfolded up in space and getting ready to make these observations. I don't really want to say more other than this is kind of what the program size looks like. Next. Is the astrophysics program. You see in blue some of our favorite space missions that have really changed how we think about the universe, as we go forward, kind of missions that are in primary, primary science, kind of in their primary phases, and then missions that are are going to fly later this year or in the following year. Some of them are international partnerships. Some of them are U.S. led. So this is our astrophysics program that is funded by the money that I just showed you. Next. It kind of, the way we talk about in science overall is every year is a year of science. I just want to tell you kind of the excitement that we had in the last 12 months, in which we landed on Mars, flew a helicopter for the first time, launched Landsat, and many other missions, and of course Webb, and deployed it together with our European and Canadian partners. Just kind of every year is a year of science. It's absolutely critical to talk about science and highlight it just the way you do also with your organizations. So this is what's happening this year, the next 12 months. So I actually don't want to talk about it much, other than to say that we believe that the first light of Webb, and what we mean with first light is really the first fully focused kind of images of the deep universe in that infrared, with these infrared instruments are going to be a critical part kind of in the June, July timeframe this year. Next. So what I want to talk about is these three topics. I want to talk about ASTRO 2020, and I'm going to set up that the very discussion I told you about, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, and then kind of talk about the kind of concept of team and how it really helps us, as we call it here, unfold, astrophysics, and then really focus on some of the elements of diversity and inclusion kind of overall and what we're learning. So the next slide is reminding you, of course, that we've received the decadal. I actually think this strategy, this decadal strategy, has really been one of the core strengths of the U.S. programs, and I know there are similar activities that are going on in each of your organizations. Our good friends in ESA have their own plan. What this really has helped us to do is build a balanced program towards a balanced program that is where we have buy-in from multiple stakeholders, independent of political party, and who in various offices, a common way of prioritizing science against science. I'm just so grateful that this is not what I need to do, kind of at my level, that we can really depend on the voice of experts that are out there. You, of course, in the meantime, I've read some of these bullets that are there. Frankly, I don't want to give a detailed discussion about this particular topic. I just want to point out that we've received it, and we take it very seriously as we go forward. Next. Overall, of course, the idea, kind of the diversity and inclusion initiatives and kind of foundations of the profession related things are a really critical part of what we're doing. There's a number of proposals beyond that, including new missions, programs, kind of time domain, astrophysics, and then of course beyond that, kind of the over time, the creation of kind of a next generation great observatory of the type that really helps us look at the sky in new ways, using space-based platforms in a way that decades ago other observations really have moved us forward. Again, our full expectation is to do that with international partners wherever that's possible, but also increasingly with commercial partnerships in ways that really allows us to accelerate and get more science per dollar. The next slide is really is there to remind you, of course, that we're taking very thoughtful time with this. So you should not expect from this presentation I will tell you everything we're going to do. But of course, there's constraints also, which is how much money is available to this. They're one of many constraints. And kind of there's information that's going to come out kind of in the February-March timeframe in 23 about the 23 budget. We're still waiting for the Congress to act on the budget that's affecting this year. We're in so-called continuing resolution, as you know, and so a lot of the work here is really critical. The near milestones ahead, of course, the near-term milestones ahead are community town hall. That is going to be in March or so, kind of focused on that funding proposal. And then in December, of course, where we expect to provide details about the pathway to discovery plan as we report what we're going to do with these recommendations. The next slide is kind of pointing out again, that we, in agreement with the critical recommendations from the decadal, we believe that diversity and inclusive teams are absolutely critical to do anything that we need to do before. It has been my personal experience that groupthink and kind of having a narrow approach to building teams, sometimes under the mantle of so-called experience, is a bad idea towards really building what is true excellence in science. And so diversity and inclusion for me is not some kind of icing on the cake. So we do the program, then we think about diversity and inclusion. It starts with that, because we cannot build the best teams and therefore the best programs if we're not at the beginning and throughout focused on this. That said, what's really critical to remember also, there's a number of kind of challenges we have. There's not one solution or one program we could do to address this. And I think the decadal does a good job kind of pointing out that we're not at the level that we need to be at, and continuing work is absolutely needed as we go forward. And there's a number of recommendations both to NASA, the National Science Foundation, and Department of Energy that outlines what the next step should be. We really agree and are focusing on implementing these with highest priority. Next. The next slide is, of course, reminding you of one of the most beautiful images that are there, taken from the deep sky, and I think of that as one of those telescopes that has all in its story encompasses all these elements. The next slide reminds you who came up with that idea, and also has a name now on a mission that's going to be a lot faster than Hubble. Basically, within the first couple of months, we'll collect the same amount of data that Hubble has in 30 years, which is the Nancy Grace Roman telescope, really looking at the sky in a broad sense. I want to point out that from the beginning, even though we didn't talk about it as much as perhaps we should have in the community, diverse teams have already had impact and continue to have impact as we go forward. The same is true with the next project here, of course, where diverse teams also in this case, focus on not only the gender and other types of diversity, but kind of the international diversity that, the coming together of many different units that related to this successful launch on Christmas Day just a few months ago. So with Webb up there next. We're really focusing again when you see about these missions. Many people think of these missions separate from the teams. I think it's absolutely important to turn it around in each one of them and basically ask, what is the team? What is diversity in this team? How is it kind of coming together? Because it will define how excellent the team can be as we go forward. What the science is that is going to go. What is going to be enabled by any one of those platforms. The next slide then is putting me to the actual point that I really want to spend a lot of effort on. And how much time do I have now? I just want to make sure I'm not overstaying my welcome.
We've only been going about 15 minutes, so you're good. We're about halfway.
Okay, good. So that's what I was hoping to achieve. Okay, so the next slide is basically telling you, and I hope all of you leaders out there have a slide like that somewhere in your portfolios. I want to just talk to you about diversity and inclusion initiatives. I have to tell you, I came to NASA not thinking that I will focus on that. I just want you to know. I did not go to NASA from my university career thinking that diversity and inclusion is one of the big issues that I'm going to have to focus on. And I want to tell you, I had kind of a hard landing. I had 2-3 issues. First of all, from the beginning, within a year, I noticed that we had, even though we had a pool, in our proposal pool, where scientists are getting research funded, we had a third to 50% in some areas of female participation. And we had in 3 of the 4 communities that I was sitting at that were served by it, 0 proposals led by women. That cannot be explained by any of these, as like, oh, it's just by accident they don't have, they don't have time. That there's major biases that these good researchers and excellent researchers respond to that basically makes them hopeless to write a proposal. So they're not even giving us a chance. And the simple reason for that is because I'm sure they tried or believe that there's 0 chance with this. The second issue that I found is that so often, frankly, I just want to say, I was in meetings where I felt that clearly there were no other viewpoints represented. So it was kind of people agreed way too fast with each other because of lack of diversity in the room that questioned and challenged the opinions. It's for that reason we started. And then, of course, because we recognize that if you want to be an excellent program, we need to tackle kind of underlying kind of challenges like that really limit our excellence. We went on a journey. Again, there is not a single solution that will solve all of these issues. You got to look at these diversity and inclusion issues as a journey that is ever getting better. And so we have a number of things in the meantime, we've read them all, and then frankly, this is a small part of what we're doing. And I'm going to talk about 2 or 3 of these programs, really trying to tackle these hidden barriers that I gave you evidence of already, and making sure that we focus on the pipeline as a whole. Kind of always say, and every scientist understand, 0.9 to the 10th power is a really small number. Just another way of saying, so often, these biases come from small changes that are accumulating over time, that basically, whenever you stand back from it, you've basically wiped out diversity, the total amount of cuts that you've made in each one of those steps over time basically create a community that is far less diverse, far less capable than a community that you could have started with if you put those 0.9s to 1s, which is 0.1, 1.0 to the 10th power is still 1, right? So if you focus on these. So that's the nature of what we're doing, and we're getting help from many people. This has been, I want to tell you, a tough and also at times a humbling set of experiences, because as you get better, you keep failing. And this is one of those things that's so hard. These journeys you have to be in for the long haul and focus and learn as you go. So with that, I want to tell you some things. So the next slide, by the way, nobody should get from my slide that any one of us thinks that we've solved the problems.
Thomas, we've got about 10 minutes, just so you're aware. We've got about 10 minutes.
We've learned about this. So again, dual anonymous peer review is one thing that we have focused on, and frankly, we're spreading around. So let me tell you what happened with dual anonymous peer review. The next slide. We focused initially on dual anonymous peer review in the overall focus on gender and racial and other type of biases that have been described in the literature. And what happens is when you look at this, all of a sudden other biases start disappearing, including biases against early career researchers, which were embedded in. So the point is, if you do some of these things right, we help the whole community, not one small part of the community. We're creating a level playing field. This is, of course, was published in Nature, this particular chart. The next slide tells you that dual anonymous peer review in a variety of programs has changed the gender balance from before to after, and doing what we expected it would do in our field from each one of the panels. The green, of course, being closer to the overall, changing the overall percentages in the direction that implies that there used to be a bias there. Next. I talked about missions, and we have really talked and communicated to the science community that we are welcoming different, kind of principal investigators across the whole spectrum, and that has gone up. What we want to do is not bias one or another way, but invite them to look at the proposals that are there. The next slide, shows that despite that huge increase, if we keep ourselves accountable and say, hey, how are we? Kind of, if you look at all these proposals, what are our biases? You see, we still have, we believe, even after all this, perhaps a selection bias against early career scientists, whereas the others are within the error bars. So kind of consistent. By the way, early careers for missions, some of the experience factors and so forth, those are hard and important discussions that we need to have. The next slide is pointing to one topic that's a really sad and important topic in astrophysics that we continue focus on, kind of toxic behavior of the type that this community has seen is the fastest way of losing diversity overall. And I think it's absolutely critical to basically, for all of us, no matter what our gender and ages are, to really go after these things and kind of eliminate sexual harassment, kind of, and hold each other accountable to that. That's really the end of it. With the next slide, I want to just remind the takeaways. It's this is a time based on this decadal and everything that is happening right now with the missions that I talked about. Nearly unprecedented opportunity for astrophysics, certainly astrophysics in and from space. Let's not miss it. I think unity of all of us are critical across astrophysics, but key stakeholders outside of the community. So let's rally behind the community as a whole and not circle the wagon and shoot inwards, which we sometimes do. And as we build a better community, we have these serious problems and challenges that decadal has outlined relative to diversity and inclusion. It takes us all. I wanted to say we at NASA are really focused on that, and we look forward to having all of you in your own respective communities do your part. With that, I'd like to stop.
Thank you very much, Thomas. That was a very interesting and excellent presentation. I'd like to open the floor to questions. You can start entering them in the chat. We already have a few, also through YouTube, email, and also by raising your hands. And whilst we wait for those questions to come in, I just want to quickly say what struck me was at the very beginning, you said excellent teams being diverse teams. That's a very nice statement, which I like. And then later on in your talk, you said you keep falling or keep failing as you kind of try to implement these. And I think the frustration of no matter what you do, the problem sort of is overpowering and is so multidimensional. I wanted to ask you, where do you personally at this stage see like the biggest hurdle from your point of view at NASA, but it also maybe relates to research systems in generally? Where do you see the biggest hurdles or the biggest areas for need for action with regards to funding incentives and how they relate to diversity and inclusion?
Well, look, I mean, I think we've made some progress towards kind of gender diversity. We're nowhere near done, but we've made some progress. I want to tell you, in the United States, kind of the racial diversity that is in our community is appalling as compared to kind of the United States. I see kind of some challenges that relate to really the and kind of the on-ramps for communities of that type, call it socioeconomic, of course, Europe has, in your own communities, you have those too. Where are the inner city kids and you're in the astrophysics communities, right? So for me, I think really learning how to build those on-ramps and making sure that we focus on and learn as we go forward, be sincere about it, is one of the biggest challenges that we have. It's just that, frankly, we have not made progress effectively in the last decade. The decadal, I think, was really strong about this. I consider it hugely important. I think what we need to do on the gender diversity side is continuing the work and continuing to learn, listening to all voices. I think what the important part is that we don't. What I really encourage all of the communities to look at: are we making progress? Voice, and making sure that kind of as people observe us, turn off the sound. are the actions consistent with our words and hold us accountable? So for us, the second point I would like to make is just really the consistency by which we need to continue to do this. We cannot wipe out problems we've created over decades in 2-3 years. We need to stick with it, and it will require kind of courage and optimism from some people that frankly have zero reason to be optimistic about, because in their careers, they've taken it to the gin for decades. So for us, that collaboration is absolutely critical as we go forward, and it has been till now. We learned a lot from people with just horrible experience, and it's really important for all of us to listen to those. Yeah, those of us who are fathers of daughters and so forth, have neighbors of diversity, is like, that's their experience. It's important to know what they are.
Okay, thank you. We've got a question coming in from Megan Reiter about having to move for your career. I'll hand over to Megan to ask the question, but maybe also you can convey a little bit, you yourself had to move as well for your career, if I'm not mistaken. So Megan, would you want to take the microphone and ask your question?
So hi, just to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the nice talk. I guess as part of the larger session, wanted to flag the idea for the discussion that having to move to build a career in astronomy is very much a part of who is applying for jobs. And I think later in the week would be very relevant for the discussion about mental health and well-being. In the context of this particular talk, I don't know how that would impact, who's applying for different things in terms of who is and isn't building teams with all of those moves. But I think as a sort of a theme related to many of the discussions we're having today, I think it's worth some attention in the discussion section.
Yeah, and I just want to say that, of course, I've moved, right, a bunch of times, and I understand that those can be really, kind of life-changing in families and really become challenging. I think we've learned a lot in the last 2 years. I would just argue there's a lot of negatives, kind of things that I don't want to go through again. I don't know how your family has been impacted by the COVID separation and so forth. We've had real challenges. I've gotten to know the phone numbers of psychologists. I never needed to get to know these phone numbers before. So there's certainly negatives, but there's also positives. And the positives are, especially for those in our teams who are caregivers and otherwise, there is a lot of work we can do without being in the same zip code as somebody. Now, I understand that the number of the astrophysics community members are in educational roles, and they're at universities and so forth. So clearly, location in some of the jobs really does matter, and the same is true with some ground-based observatories. I do not understand that space as well as I do the space version. I just want to tell you, relative to where we are, I think we really believe that the future going forward is one that is more flexible relative to the locations where people are, and there's a lot of learning ahead of us. But I would say that the learnings in the last 2 years have moved towards a more inclusive view of that in many ways.
Thank you very much. We've got another question from Melanie Cassinen, which also relates to a few points you've already touched upon, with people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, also relating to undergraduates. Melanie, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So how do we target these inner city kids or also rural kids from poorer areas or with very disadvantaged backgrounds? Is this something where we have to work with the education system and governments? And what do you see as our role as scientists?
So I've been struggling about this. You of course don't know that, but I'm a rural kid. I remember when I overheard a teacher talking to another teacher and saying, from my little town where I grew up, the kids are usually not that smart. Just look at their parents. I remember kind of how that felt listening to that, right? And when I went to a teacher later on and basically said, look, I really think I should go to university, he actively discouraged me. He said, you have to be really smart to that. So kind of, I understand how it is on that side. what helped me and what I see help others is really kind of sincere and personal interactions that matter, together with an educational system that really helps lift people. So it is all of the above. I do believe, and I spend time, kind of in my annual time budget of giving presentations. I'm talking to you here, but I also spend time going to community colleges and talking to, kind of inner city kids to talk about the power and the excitement that science can bring to that. And I really encourage you all to do that. I think it's really, you can really get boxed into a comfort zone in which, you keep talking to the choir, as I call it, kind of like the same people, and the applause is very loud. They already know you. But kind of stepping out and spending some time really reaching out, adopting a school, so what I used to do was I found this community that I worked in because of a board I sat on, that a teacher said, I want to build this hands-on science program. And, and this was before I went to NASA, and I basically said, look, I'll fund it with a condition that I can be a mentor for it. So I spent time meeting these children, and some of them made it into science that wouldn't have otherwise done it. So for me, I just really encourage everyone to do that. But of course, holding our political leaders accountable to make sure these systems are really lifting that. And needless to say, in the US, we have enormous challenges in that domain.
Thank you very much. I'm sure those challenges are not only present in the US, I think they're all over the world. Very similar. I'd like to hand over to Priscilla Pesci, who's got her hand up. So Priscilla, if you want to take the microphone, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, this is not a directed question. This is more for a discussion that I think it already started, but if not, then maybe I will ask later. So let's say the discussion started. So I would like to listen to all your opinions because I mean, it's common for people discussing diversity to only focus on gender, and I know this is moving on. And thanks so much for the organizers to give this space on this meeting also. But I have seen that when you try to consider other aspects in terms of diversity, then you feel like you are giving away very personal information, and the most boxes you check, the most you wonder whether if you get the offer, whether you are hired because you just check a lot of the diversity requirements. And also maybe to connect with previous talks, if you are from a developing country, you also have a lot of disadvantages. You might check a lot of the diversity boxes, but you have maybe less publications or less recognition for your publications just because you are from a developing country. And maybe to wrap up a bit, I think it's great the dual blind selection process and so on. But there is also sometimes a language barrier when it comes to applications. So no-native English speakers will tend to have worse applications than native language speakers, like native English speakers. And of course, there is the issue also that some organizations restrict their applications to certain nationalities, or even say that certain nationalities will be given priority, and this might discourage applicants, of course. So I think it's very broad, my question, but I would like to hear all your opinions about this.
So I think you're going to go into a broader discussion, because I think my opinion is probably not the only one that matters here at all. So by the way, I think what you're saying is a really profound point, which is sometimes we tend to over-focus on one area. And I want to just tell you, so after 5 years on the job, I wrote down kind of what I think were the biggest mistakes I've made on the job. And this is one of them, actually one of the top ones, because I think for us to address the issue at hand here, to really build the best teams and an inclusive community, we need to focus on all dimensions of diversity. I have used gender, and I've used it again, because it's frankly the only way I can talk about diversity and show numbers, because I just want to tell you some of the dimensions of diversity that we care about. There are no numbers available because, frankly, for a variety of reasons, some of them legal in the United States, or it's so obvious what the 2 or 3 community members are that are shown there that it becomes personally identifiable. That is not fair. So we cannot deal with that. I think, I do recognize that there are, especially in hiring processes, that there are biases that, can occur. And I can't speak for all the experiences you've had, but I need to say some of the US, if you work in space things, kind of export control laws can limit the candidate pool. There's other reason that is there. What I'd really would encourage you to kind of being non-English native English speaker as well. I just want to tell you, one of the kind of most empowering things to be able to do is asking for help. I want to tell you what I did when I started applying. I found a writer, an English writer in my circle of friends, and I hired her to help me do better applications. And I'm not saying that is the right way or the only way to do it, but frankly, it eliminated a lot of stress from me. Because frankly, the simple kind of mistakes, I didn't want to be a burden on my colleagues. And I just really wanted to get help. And frankly, I remember when I finally got the job, she gave me an English grammar book as a present as I departed my community. And I thought I needed it. So it's still on my desk, because she really helped me so much. Again, she was a friend, somebody that became a closer friend as a result of that. I agree, though, with your question, we need to create spaces in which we can talk about other dimensions of diversity, kind of an openness without kind of forcing people into checking boxes that kind of identify them in a way that they themselves are not comfortable with. And I really don't know. Again, it's a path ahead of us. I would really like to learn relative to the US, what are the things that we can do better that we have not done? Because I agree with the intent of your question entirely. The goal is that we're not creating extra hurdles ahead of you or everybody else by an application process, by a questionnaire, by the hurdles that are there overall. So I just think the question that you're asking is important and needs to be answered by each of us who run organizations or are part of the community. I'm actually interested in other answers too.
I think also we can start opening the discussion a bit broader, like you said as well. And I'm also aware that you yourself will have to leave in a few minutes. So if one of the other speakers wants to come in on this, or indeed, I think, Abigail, you mentioned in the questions also something about outreach, which we can touch on. But I see, Francesca, you've switched on your camera. Francesca, do you want to come in on this point?
Yes, thank you. So I wanted just to comment on what Priscilla just said. Indeed, I mean, it's not just, and it should not be actually a matter of checking boxes and identify yourself. I think that in order to attract a more diverse pool of candidates, of applicants, I mean, you need really to think about how you want to portray your organization or your institute towards the outside and which type of words you use in order to attract a diverse pool of applicants. So you don't need to force them, I mean, to check I'm whatever, Afro-American, I'm white, I'm straight, I'm this and I'm that, I'm so old. But you need to show that you are open, that you are encouraging application, that you are welcoming application, that you believe in building diverse teams in order to become more innovative and more creative. And these are things that are fundamental statements that you need to have out there in order to become a kind of more attractive pole. And then you said something else, and now actually it escaped my mind. So maybe I will come back to that later, sorry.
Maybe you want to answer to that, Thomas, and then I know you're going to have to probably head off in about 3 minutes, but maybe if you have some further comments on that.
I really agree with that. And I think kind of the point is this has to be a discussion, right? Kind of what you can't do is kind of turn on the diversity and inclusion discussion kind of during a half hour when you're focusing on it. It kind of the goal is that it's in your organization. The good news is it gets easier over time. I just want you to know, like, I mean, here's my practical experience. The first time I was searching for a director, kind of in science, remember they only were of one gender and they looked like me and were older, generally speaking, you know. So I look for a director. It's like, I want a level playing field, right? Kind of. So what I did is I sat down and I started calling people. It's like, have you considered yourself that every person of diversity that applied, I had called, and of course we did. Our colleagues are so good. We do not need to bias. We just need a level playing field. That's all we ever did. And, you know, the majority of our directors are different today. And what happens, kind of the first time I needed to do this, now we have already created a place where these applications are coming because our actions are showing that we care. You see, it's not like it gets better, it gets easier. And of course, you know, what's important is to not back off and continue to go that path. But, you know, the most powerful voice in support of diversity and inclusions of all kinds is your actions, not your words. And so for me, that's where we want to shine, right? Kind of that will, and it creates trust, because I have to tell you, I remember the first time in a room where one of our female colleagues got shut down and I was just going to jump in, and another female colleague pushed her forward. And that didn't happen. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, it's like, you know, somebody gives a good idea. You've seen the movies, you know, you've seen all the examples. Somebody has a great idea. It's getting ignored. Somebody else says that, you know, it's more like me, says the idea, and everybody says, that's a great idea. It's like the second person, it wasn't me who had to do it anymore. It's a second person that went in. Hang on, she just made that, that's her idea. Let's go back to her and elevate it. You know, so these self-correcting things, once you turn the dial, these kind of things are becoming self-enforcing. And of course, again, I'm not suggesting that at the end of it, but I just want to say, again, it can't be in the half hour in the evening after you're done with all the work. So it has to be part of really a strong belief that it is part of our missions and it is part of our science community, and it's therefore critical for our success. I apologize that I need to go on and kind of deal with a planetary mission that apparently has a challenge, but I really appreciate the opportunity and thank everybody who's caring about these important topics. And I just wish you nothing but the best. I look forward to learning from your discussions as well as from others. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for joining us, Thomas. That was very, very interesting. We will continue with the discussion here and we'll see you some other time somewhere else. Thank you very much, Thomas. Bye-bye. Right. So with this, I want to definitely make sure that the discussion is open. I would like to ask all our presenters to keep the camera on as we're going further. We've got Valentin back here. We've got Francesca. We've got Abigail. We've got Thiago here. Is there any comment from you guys at this point? Otherwise, we'll take some more questions. But if anybody of you want to jump in on some of the discussion points we just also discussed with Thomas before he left.
Just to reinforce what he just said, I think that it has to be strategic. This is what he said. It cannot just be something that you say something and you pay attention to it. It has to be part of organizational strategy. And what he said, I think that it is true. So I truly believe that the diversity that you have in your organization more or less matches the diversity that you are able to attract. Therefore, if you have a very reduced diversity in your organization, this is visible towards the outside, and there is a higher risk that you will not be very attractive, because people will look, the young generation, I think that they pay significantly more attention to these aspects than we did 20, 30 years ago. And therefore, if they see and they think that a given institute or organization or team is not diverse enough, is not inclusive enough, they may decide not to apply. And therefore, it's very important. So I fully agree to take up the phone and call candidates, especially for the first few rounds, in order to increase the diversity, in order to get, and this is not giving the job. I mean, also coming back to what Priscilla said before, it's not just assuring that the person gets hired just because, has ticked some boxes, I think. That's not part of the game. It's really just to allow to have a significantly broader pool of applicants to choose from and to evaluate and to learn from them.
A very important point there. Now, I don't know if it seems like we've just lost Valentin. There might be some technical challenges there, but it'd be interesting to also hear your view, Valentin, if you can hopefully still hear us. But otherwise, we've got a question from the audience.
Sorry to jump in,
yes,
because my Valentin apologizes, but he had to leave. So that's
okay. So that's unfortunate. Right. Okay, great. Because this is something that I also picked on earlier. I think the question of excellence is very interesting, and how we saw that Thomas says, excellence is also diversity in teams. So the question is also, to what extent is excellent research excellent, or maybe even only excellent if it is conducted by diverse teams, and do you require that? And then also, do you have to have diversity in the actual evaluation panels? So maybe we can just quickly touch on that. It's unfortunate that Valentin isn't here, but maybe I'd quickly ask this as a first question to our panel members here. To what extent do you think the panels that actually evaluate research, when it's decided who gets what kind of funding, are diverse enough? Do you have any personal experience with that respect? Also from example at ESO. Like I said, it's a shame that Valentin isn't here, but maybe one of the other speakers wants to pick up on that question.
Yeah, I think it can be a very powerful tool, because I think if we are actively, in a way, it creates a level of accountability. I think, it's good if we are, we know that diverse teams create benefits, and we know it's the right thing to do. It's just but people often do get stuck in their habits, especially I think for very, very established researchers. And it's because as Francesca was saying, I think the focus on diversity has switched a lot in the younger generation, but then I think there is still work to be done, and I think it is good. I think it encourages people to take action and make that actions speak, as was said earlier, rather than just either ignoring the issue or kind of not really doing the work in order to actually improve things within their own groups.
Thank you. I want to also again remind our audience on YouTube and everybody through email, etc., to keep asking questions to the panel. I'll hand over to Sandra Saviglio to ask a question.
Hi, can you hear me? Thank you for this. Hi, I want to go back to the ERC talk, and I had a question on the chat, so I go back to the question. It's actually related to inclusion and countries and ERC programs. So it's a known thing that Italian applicants are not very successful compared to other countries with similar population, like UK or France or Spain, or well, Spain maybe it's closer to Italy than to UK. But and I have no doubt ERC programs are the program is selecting the quality more than the country or factors like this. But this difference is, this fact is very clear, and I don't understand why. Maybe I have some suspicions why this is the case, but I wonder if in the audience somebody has any idea why ERC programs coming from Italian PIs have a low success rate, and it's comparable in absolute numbers to Israel. But Israel is a much smaller country. The population is 8 million people. Italy is 60 million people. So I wonder whether somebody knows why there's such a thing.
Maybe we can also extend the question a little bit, because I think this is also true for various countries. Like a lot of countries have very different kind of success rates on ERC. So if one of our panelists knows about this one way or another, unfortunate that Valentin isn't here, maybe somebody in the audience wants to say something to that. Maybe if so, just raise your hand at this point and we can come back to it. But otherwise, I think the answer is probably very difficult. We've looked into these kind of success rates for other topics in Switzerland, and the answer is often not very straightforward. There's so many factors that can come in. But why don't we go ahead for now? And I would say if there's somebody who has a response to that question, maybe enter it into the chat. Unless there's a comment from the panel here, just because I think as long as we don't have Valentin online, it might be a bit hard for us to answer that question. Very interesting question, though, and like I say, very multifaceted. So I'll hand over to Norma Sanchez. Please, if you could ask your question, and then we'll continue with the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I also go to the first talk on the ERC presentation. And because we are here also for, the subject, as I understand, of the journey today is the founding in astronomy and all the kinds of, all the aspects. And I think it could be interesting from the ERC presentation to be more precise on which are the disciplines in the science of the universe, which is the label for astronomy or astrophysics says. It was presented in the huge list of the different disciplines covered by ERC. And so, which are the disciplines allowed on which are listed in the ERC science of the universe? And more precisely, because ERC have said from its founding, from its beginning, just many years of activity, which are the disciplines in science of the universe which were more founded, which the percent of which are the percent with respect to traditional astronomy disciplines and the emergent or the more modern. This is a real interesting point to see, because more or less the organization is self-similar with another organization or set on a more a small level, but even if it's not the same, completely same esprit, but the European Commission or all the program of the European Commission and so on. And this, I think, it was not shown, and it will be very interesting to be updated, this, which are the status today of science of the universe with respect to other disciplines in Earth. And then we will see also with respect to the countries. I agree with the previous question that it should be very important to clarify the different percents of successful founding projects. And this is one of the points.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm aware that Valentin isn't here, so I think, again, those questions might be better directed straight to him. But I want to just quickly pick up on what you said in general. So the idea that these different funding success rates are various. We had it before between the countries, but also with respect to other dynamics. I want to just quickly pick up on that question also and feed it back to the panel so we can get an answer on that question. With regards to these different funding success rates, like I say, we can't really go into the details because we don't have Valentin here with regards to ERC, but to what extent, how do you see the connection between some of the topics we've discussed here in Brazil, at ESO, right, at the individual level as well, with regards to these funding pressures, right? Because some grants, for example, at the ERC, there's just a very low success rate, so it is extremely competitive. What is your view on the relationship between these kind of dynamics that we see and these kind of extremely high competitiveness? I don't know, maybe Thiago, do you want to start us off on this?
Let me wait for a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe someone else can take the reins for.
I mean, we can also just basically what I'm trying to get to is this idea of a limited resource, right? I mean, for example, telescope time is another limited resource. To what extent is this maybe the source of the problem, that we just don't have enough resources, and so the competition becomes so hard that it becomes sort of an elbowing fight? Is that part of it, or would that make no difference at all? There's plenty of resources, but we're not good at sharing them. So maybe, is there any kind of comment on that?
I think just to comment on that last sentence, I think the part of the problem that we have is that is maybe thinking a little bit harder on how to allocate those resources, and I think that goes very much hand in hand with what the other speaker said about inclusion. I think this is something that requires a lot of effort, so that we don't bring our biases into the review process, and we do know that this generates a lot of exclusions, and I think Abigail showed a lot of that research. I haven't seen the 2019 paper, but there was a paper before, I think it was 2012, with the blind, just the gender swapping, so showing how that translates into different reviews for men and women. So I think at some point the higher ups in those different committees or different governments, depending on what you're trying to deal with, they have to consider what we're actually trying to do. I think that's our main problem. Even that translates, of course, to the problem of inclusion. The problem that I try to bring here was a little different, but it relates to somehow the inequality in how you're trying to allocate the resources. And in Brazil, we do see that the resources are very much allocated towards people who already have more resources. That is a bias that's generated, not because of gender or race, but because of a view on how do I put this? Because they're considered more productive, or whatever you want to call it. And what scared me in Brazil, especially with respect to the study that we did 2 years ago, was that how in a time of shortage, in a time that funding for science were suffering from a lot of cuts, the ones that were suffering more strongly were precisely the ones on the bottom of the pyramid, let's say. So that is, there's no strategy behind that. I think that's just a bias that translates into the on how to deal with those shortages. That translates into a lot of exclusion in our case, mostly in terms of geography, I would say. But it's cruel in a way, and it's short-sighted, because then you're not allowing for any growth anymore. You're just allocating those resources within groups that already have resources, saying, "Oh, these are the productive ones." But at the same time, this is then okay. This is going to be like that forever. And when these people die, what are you going to do, right?
Yeah, indeed. Unless Abigail or Francesca, you guys just jump in if there's anything you want to say. I've got another question otherwise coming here from Giacomo.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. I just wanted to follow up a bit on what Tiago was saying, because also Tiago made an interesting comment in the Zoom chat, just which I tried to capture. Maybe Tiago, if I misunderstood, please correct me. But the point, the good point he was making is how the dual anonymous method has proved to be. Thomas showed us that has been used in proposal. Which winning a proposal means also then gaining experience, and so showing leadership in a sense, and so also for fundings in the future can be increasing your CV. So it has. So what I want to say, that it has a big, it has proved to be working to be seems to be successful, and how much this is applied also for fundings, evaluation for fundings, for example, and expanding on that, which an aspect which I found very fascinating and very difficult. We at ESO, we are very often discussing about that in the context of, for example, the fellow selection, the selection of our fellows. So how do you, is there technically a way to make the curriculum vitae anonymous in a sense, so that they become, I don't know how to say, that you don't, how to do that? You see what I mean? To remove basically aspect in the curriculum that would encourage biases, and not encourage, but, you know, so you see what I mean? So how to make the application process itself such that these biases are kind of mitigated, you know, so you see what I mean? So it's an interactive, I mean, I think it's a very fascinating aspect, you know, of the whole thing. Just want to know, or if you want to think about that. So I hope it was clear. Sorry.
If I can just add to that question, it's something that I've heard from people in the review committees here in Brazil is that the call is, it has a lot of details on how things are graded, but I've actually heard directly from people who are in the committee saying that, for example, in that productivity and research call that I've mentioned in my talk, the reviewers don't even read the research project, or maybe they're just diagonally, which is insane, right? So I think it's really difficult, and that's why I was asking on in terms of funding, because funding, you do need to evaluate the CV in some sense, and it's hard to do that anonymously. I don't know, I'm not an expert. I would love to hear ideas on that, but at the very least, I would say that the research project should be evaluated anonymously and separated from the CV so that people with good ideas have a chance, and they do not translate the biases to just reading the CV and saying, oh, I know this person. Yeah, they already have the money. I know they're good. So let's just keep giving money to them. That completely cuts off any possibility either of a fair comparison or competition especially between young and old. Certainly the inclusion goes to hell on that. So I do like the idea of the anonymous review very much, and at the very least, I would say that the research project part should be dealt with anonymously. And I know Hui Hyun, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, was saying that NASA was doing that. Maybe this was how they did it, was something like a 2-stage evaluation. I don't know how that goes, but I would love to be able to tell people in Brazil to do something like that.
If I may,
Francesca, do you want to come in? Yes, please.
Yes. I will just add my 2 cents. So I'm very progressive or progressist person. So I think that in terms of applications for jobs or for fellowship, for instance, right? I mean, do we really need a CV? In a sense that the CV could be really streamlined to the minimum amount of information that can be kept almost anonymous. So you could say how many years from PhD you are, or what has been your experiences without identifying yourself. I know that it's difficult. I mean, I ask myself the same question many times. And I think that the focus should be on the research project, which can be anonymized, because it's like the way that we write and observing proposals. Now, I mean, the community is being trained and has been trained in writing proposals which are anonymous. Therefore, I think that a research project can be anonymized. Of course, when you apply for a job, the difference is that you want to sell what you have done, because this is what in the end also comes in. And it could be a 2-stage where, you know, you first evaluate the research project like we do for observing proposal. You look at the science. We always tell our review panels, you need to focus on the science. Don't think about technical feasibility. Don't think about any other issue. So you concentrate on the research project, and then at the 2nd stage, you may want to start looking up if a person, what have been the achievements, and a little bit more into detail. The other thing I believe, Giacomo, is that something that you have already done a couple of years ago, right? Wasn't it that you did this experiment where you restricted the number of publications? And this is what I meant before in my talk about standardizing the application forms, where you ask actually the candidate to give you only the top 5 or the top 10 publications that they consider the most relevant and the ones that they can demonstrate actually their achievements the best. And you could even give extra whatever constraints, right? To give me the, I don't know, I mean, but you could phrase it in a way that, you know, the most relevant one, the ones that you're most proud of, the ones that you have, whatever. I mean, you know, they were mostly breaking science or breaking new theory, new observations. I mean, they can choose on their own, or you can give them instructions. But I think that if everybody would submit just 5 or 10 publications, you know, then it would be probably already a step forward. And then we need to move away from the way that we constantly measure things and assess people. I mean, the H-index, it is true what I think Tiago said. I believe it is a very common situation in which the research project is read diagonally, just to have an idea about the science. You trust the person, you just say, well, this person for sure will do good science. And then you concentrate just on that little H-index or M-index or how many publications, how many leadership papers, and it doesn't really mean anything. It is true that the H-index in principle should measure somehow a certain degree of quality, but of impact, let's say, more than quality. But it's not quantity what counts. And so we need to be a little bit more, I think, review. I mean, to take a step outside and relook at what we are doing.
I think a big challenge with the H-index is also that it correlates with age and is highly variable between fields. So it's generally seen as a very problematic measure in that respect. Exactly. I've got a question from Melanie Cassinen coming up with regards to teams, but I want to just quickly stay on the current focus, on the current topic. Yes?
Sorry to disturb, because I just wanted to clarify a small clarification. I completely in line with what Francesca was saying. Is just to mention that what we implemented. That's what the idea was, to go into the direction of focusing on quality instead of quantity. Basically, we implemented the possibility for people that apply, for candidates that apply for the fellowship program, for example, there is an application form where people we ask explicitly to tell us what they are proud of. So they have a part in which they tell us about themselves. So beyond basically the science quantity they have done, but that's just to go tell us what you're proud of, which is your achievement, but without giving any recipe about that. So just to tell, and so the list of publications stays there, but towards the end is not the. But the thing is that is indeed, I agree with Francesco. We ask people, okay, tell us which is the paper they are proud of, why. So tell about you. So this is a way to move into the quality regime. Basically, I just wanted to mention that. Sorry.
I mean, what you mentioned is a very important point, because Francesca, what you were saying, one thing is to get rid of completely of CVs. Something else that's developing more and more with regards to funding is to move to narrative CVs, where you don't just have lists, but you allow the person applying to describe where they see their strengths, how they interpret their CV. So maybe Abigail, I'd like to ask you what is your opinion with regards to narrative CVs? Is that a good approach? Is that something you would generally think is a good approach to allow people to give voice, or would it still be better to go in the direction of what Francesca was saying and get completely rid of CVs?
Yeah, I mean, I think a narrative CV can help put things into perspective for people who are assessing them, particularly if you have a research break for whatever reason. Maybe you have like a period of mental health issues, perhaps you had to, you didn't get certain experience because you had to work a job during your undergraduate studies, so you didn't have time for certain activities which may like boost your CV. I mean, I think that can help for sure, but also I do like the idea of not having, like, moving away from the typical CV completely in that way, because you and limiting, like, as Francesca was saying, to say, oh, here, just tell us about the 5 publications that you are most proud of, or you don't need to there's a lot of information which only helps people to act on bias, such as name, like which university you're from, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, yeah, I think there's definitely room for removing a lot of that information and then helping everything to be a bit more of an even playing field. But I do think there is some benefit if you are required to talk about times and breaks and things, though you can have an opportunity to talk about that and why this might, why your trajectory has gone the way it has. So yeah, I'm not sure which at the moment, but I think they're both good options compared to.
There will be more opportunities to discuss it, I think, also tomorrow. I'm guessing this will be a topic as well. I want to give Melanie Cassian the word. She's got a question with regards to teams and funding.
Thanks. So it seems to me that the academic environment doesn't really favor working in teams at the moment. And this is maybe stemming a lot from discussions with former colleagues who've left academia, who say that their work environment now is more diverse. So it seems like we hire strong individuals and not necessarily team players. And we encourage peers to compete against each other. So both for funding and jobs. So I don't know if this is just the natural result of a limit to funding, but it seems that the constant competition is actually a challenge for diversity and teamwork, as Thomas mentioned before. So I was wondering if the speakers also agree that we have this kind of cell mentality in academia, or if this is coming from someone fairly junior. And if so, does this prohibit actual diversity in both background and in thinking?
Does one of the speakers want to take up that question?
I'm going to go in a different direction, perhaps, in the sense that I think it depends a lot on the environment that you're trying to examine. And for example, in Brazil, one thing that I've seen is that the teams are evaluated maybe too strongly because, again, of the way the research is evaluated and quantified in terms of how many papers you have published. And again, it doesn't matter if you're first author or not many times. And this ends up favoring people who are in big groups just because there are more people publishing, and in the end you have more papers, and those are the people who are considered more productive by the system and the way they're evaluated. So I did my PhD in the US, so I completely understand what you're saying, and I do agree that this is a problem in other areas. I'm just emphasizing that it might be different in different environments, to the point that yes, you're trying to sell something. I think this is the main point, the sell mentality that you mentioned in the chat. I think that's very true, but maybe different systems are trying to sell different things as what's being done. And I do think that there's in all systems, either in the US or Europe or Brazil with all its quirks, it's very often composed of people who are who have been a product of that bringing up, let's say. So it's definitely a case of survivor bias in different manners in different places, right? So I remember in the US, the environment was much more aggressive in the sense that people who were aggressive were the ones that survived better that process, and that creates this mentality. And that's also the case in Brazil in a different manner, just because the system is creating that mentality of sell, but just sell the number of papers that you have been on, even if you're not leading those papers. And again, I think it comes back to one of my slides, that the who watches the watchman, because that's those people who are in the committees and who are doing the evaluation are very often the survivors of that process, with all of its vices throughout their histories. And I think it's very difficult, and I love to see people discussing it, because I think this is my main concern, is that are we actually reflecting on how we evaluate science and how we are trying to improve the process? And I think there's a huge inertia on how this is being done everywhere, because the people who are doing the evaluations are the people who are considered successful within that system, and that just tends to perpetuate whatever vices and whatever biases you're bringing into the system to begin with. And I actually don't know how to do that. How are we gonna convince the people on top that we do need to do better and there are ways to improve? And those improvements are going to be better depending on the situation that you're trying to deal with.
Francesca,
yes, if I may intervene as well. So in response to Melanie, I mean, I have a comment and then I also have a bit of more of a question. I think that it may, and also as Tiago said, I mean, it certainly depends on the environment, right? So I see a difference between a kind of more observatory environment, like for instance, ESO, and an environment which is purely academic, where you have a department of, where you teach and you do your own research. It is true that probably to both places, it applies the fact that in the end, who you are hiring is indeed an individual, a strong individual. But then in an observatory environment, I believe this is what at least I have experienced at ESO during my career. Actually, there is team working, because you are dealing also with different types of projects, hands-on and various types of developments, technological, instrumental, software, and that by definition you work in teams. It's very difficult. It's almost impossible to work as an individual. I mean, in serving the observatory, in achieving the goals of the observatory. In an academic environment, I see that could indeed be. I don't have much experience, so I see that that could be significantly a bigger problem. But then comes my question. So are you referring only to teams within the department, your academic unit, or you are talking in general about teams? Because my perception is that astronomy is moving towards the big teams, the big surveys, the big data type of science. And therefore, what I see is more and more huge and large collaborations across continents, across countries, across institutes. And at that point, I believe that even if you are an individual in your own department, but because of your science, you start collaborating and you are part of a big collaboration, I think that there is team working. It's a different type of team working. I agree, it may not be as satisfactory as having the team within your department, but I think that also that for me would count as team working.
Melanie, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. I guess my question was quite unclear in how I'd worded teams. I take the point that science has a lot of big collaborations and big teams working on instrumentation or large projects, and that's also true at ESO. Maybe I was talking also more about the university environment and people at a more junior level. So to break that up more, often, if you're applying for a postdoc fellowship or other postdoc positions, people are not looking at how well you work in a team in a purely academic sense, unrelated to the instrumentation, but they're looking at how you've carved a path or forged out a certain niche, and that you're the expert in that. And I think also when it comes to collaborations, we're encouraged certainly to collaborate, but still in a way that we, or the one person, is the expert in their field, and they're having others help them on that. I think that's where I was getting at with that point as well, is rather than having a team where everybody has, say, an equal role, in the end, you have a paper with a first author, and that's what's counted.
Does one of the speakers want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think I completely like relate to the what Melanie is saying, and like how not every and I think, yes, working in teams depends on the specific team and the specific environment, but I feel like there is definitely cases of favoritism and cases of not every role in the team is necessarily validated as in terms of who's publishing the work as first author, which is used in the new system metric. And I think it is I think also it also can depend very specifically on the team lead and the kind of and their preferences for the kinds of people they can work with, and that can introduce another kind of bias, whether they want kind of go-getting more aggressive people, or if they want a certain type of person or someone they relate to. And I think this all then ties back into diversity again. And I think this is it's an important thing to consider, and I think we do have a ways to go to kind of make sure that we, like the team aspect is a bit more valued, and that the work within those teams is like adequately reflected on people who are then applying for positions after.
I think all these points, just to kind of tie it again to the topic of funding, all this then, of course, in the second stage has a direct influence on funding success, which just simply perpetuates the problem again and again. But with regards to, in the first talk, we had this notion that the basis for funding decisions, and I don't want to paraphrase or oversimplify in any way, but it has at least something to do with excellence, with Thomas at NASA. We heard that he had this idea of diversity in teams is a part of excellence. So maybe to kind of what we were just talking about, the question which sometimes people are confronted with is, what is it? Should we have a complete diverse workforce, or should we support only the very, very best and be completely blind to all those other issues? And I'm obviously overstating or kind of oversimplifying it. It's not that simple, but sort of at the end of the day, between those two, how do you decide between those two? How do you create the balance, or is there no need for a balance? Is it the same question, just formulated in a different way?
If I may, I think you can't we just evaluate on merit, because we don't live in an equal society, and people do not have the same opportunities and the same paths in life. And if you just go on merit, you're ignoring a lot of societal factors which are affecting specific groups of people, and you don't improve diversity that way, because if we lived in that society, then that would make sense. Then this wouldn't be the discussion. But this is not the case, and historically, certain groups have actively been discouraged from engaging in science or been denied access to scientific fields and research. And the repercussions of that is still here. So there has to be an element of proactiveness in the way that we tackle things in the future, because otherwise we're never going to get anywhere. And I agree that ultimately, we just go I agree ultimately that would be ideal, but we're not there yet, and we're not going to be if we continue to just take that mindset.
I think as long as we see the outcome isn't diverse and with equal opportunities, then we're clearly not there yet, because otherwise that would sort of be a self-fulfilling result at that point. So we have a question from Maria Alessandra Papa, if you want to take the floor.
Hi, yes. Well, I wanted to say something about the large teams, and particularly following up on Melanie's comment. How are the team players evaluated, and who goes on to permanent positions from the team players? And I think that in the same way that we must respect diversity in what different scientists decide to do, I think that we must recognize that the large grants, the NASA Excellence grants, or these other prestigious grants, quote unquote, are for a specific type of scientists. They are for the ones that, for example, want to have a group. They have a vision for something that they want to achieve. They have, some burning desire, and they need certain resources to do it. Now, if you're that type of person, that type of scientist, then it's right that you should go for those sort of grants. But those are not the only ways to get permanent positions in academia, to continue to do research. There's other environments and other venues. And so I think we should be careful in not considering those type of grants the only metric for success. There are plenty of people, and I would say most people, who get permanent positions who are not the recipients of those grants. There is place for people who do, perfectly good work and who are not ever going to lead a group of several people doing something. It's okay to not be that type of scientist. So I would say let's not equate success only to be the recipient of that type of funding that is a very specific type of funding. That's a comment I wanted to make.
Joe, do you want to respond to that?
So I fully agree that this should not be used as a measure of success. But again, I think the problem is that very, very often it is, and this the way it works is that I do know that people are more often considered for jobs when they have received an award, and so it accumulates. And I think this is one of the vices that we all do when we're evaluating researchers and scientists and giving the awards and the grants, is that this is taken into account to a point where it's cumulative. And talking from personal experience, I do know that for example, I had a period. I'm father of two girls, and I had a period around the time when the first one was born and the second one 3 years after that. There was a hiatus there in my career where I was not being able to publish as much. And when that happens, then you don't get, in my case, again, coming back to my talk, the productivity and research grant. And that prevented me from getting pretty much anything else, which was hampering my ability to do research and to get funding for my research, for getting computers and travel and whatnot. So my main concern with respect to the grants and awards is that they and I don't know of any studies, but I would guess that maybe it's another unconscious bias, or how we do the evaluation, is that you're not evaluating the quality of the research or the researcher in more general terms, but you're looking at the CV and listing the awards and grants that someone has already received. And I know that once I overcame that barrier here in Brazil, it became a lot easier to get other grants and get more money. So for me, at least in my career, it came in a little bit in waves, in the sense that there's time of plenty and there's time of not getting anything. And the problem is that the previous results are used in conjunction with new evaluations of your CV. And that can be cruel, because if you don't get something, then you're not on the fast track to get other things. So I completely agree with the point, yes, that it shouldn't act like that. There should be room for diversity, not only in terms of gender and other personal aspects, but also in terms of how we see science being done, not only as an individual effort. But I don't think, unfortunately, I'm quoting Abigail here, I don't think we're at that point yet.
With that, I'm also kind of taking a look at our time. We had another anonymous question with regards to how visa restrictions have influence on these aspects. I think we won't have time to get into that question. There are many others like it as well. Of course, there are just so many parameters, but we'll have more time to discuss these things tomorrow. For now, I just wanted to say thank you very much also to the speakers who are not with us right now as well, for this incredibly interesting discussion and these really interesting talks. I think for me, what was very clear in the different presentations is just the measure of merit that is used is complex, and it has huge effects on it. And we saw also from Francesca that you have to be very systematic in the way that you apply these measures, or that you use them when hiring, or indeed funding, as we were talking about today. And the different just the different levels that we discuss this topic on, for me, very much highlights how complex this topic is. Something that also Thomas pointed out, just like, this is we're in the long game to get this going. And I also very much agree with you, Abigail, that we're far from there. I think it's really, we have a lot still to do, which is kind of sad, but at the same time, we are all here discussing these topics, and that's already maybe one small step in that direction, which is also very much encouraging. So with that, I want to thank very much Thomas and Valentin, who are not here anymore at the moment, for their great presentations, but also especially Abigail, Thiago, and Francesca for your great presentations. I want to thank everybody on YouTube for questions, everybody through email for questions, and for participating. I want to thank everybody here in Zoom, the whole audience. It's been really, really great, and I'm very much looking forward to also the discussion tomorrow. And then last but not least, I want to also thank Giacomo and Henri for their support in setting all this up, all these great discussions, all these great talks over these many days. And with that, I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow and continuing where we left off today. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.